Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Have you ever had to attend a funeral for someone you actually disliked? It is the ultimate social minefield. You want to be respectful to the grieving family, but you also don't want to stand there and tell a massive lie. How do you find something nice and honest to say? Today, we are diving into a 10-chapter story called The Funeral Etiquette. As we follow our main character, Arthur, navigate this incredibly awkward day, you are going to learn advanced vocabulary, idioms, and phrases for handling high-stakes social situations in English. Grab a notebook, listen closely to the expressions, and let's find out if Arthur can survive the receiving line. Chapter 1. The Obligation.
Arthur received the email on a rainy Tuesday morning. The subject line was stark, "In Memoriam Richard Vance." Richard, his former manager for 5 long years, had passed away suddenly. Arthur sat staring at his screen, his coffee cooling in his mug. His first unfiltered reaction wasn't sadness, it was a strange, hollow quiet. Richard had been a difficult man, to put it politely. He was a boss who excelled at stealing credit and micromanaging every single email. Working under him had felt like a 5-year exercise in patience. The obituary included the funeral details, and a chill ran down Arthur's spine. He felt the heavy weight of a social obligation. His instinct was to delete the email, stay home, and avoid the whole thing. Who goes to the funeral of a man they openly disliked? But office politics and basic human decency demanded otherwise. Richard's widow, Clara, had always been kind during the annual company parties. Skipping the service would look spiteful, petty, and unprofessional. Arthur knew he had to bite the bullet. He had to go out of sheer courtesy. He clicked the link to confirm his attendance, feeling like he was being dragged kicking and screaming into a major emotional trap. The real problem wasn't waking up early or wearing a stiff suit or sitting in a cold chapel. The real problem was the receiving line. What on earth was he going to say to Richard's grieving family? He needed to find a line that was diplomatic, polite, and somehow completely honest. Arthur stood in front of his closet on the morning of the service. The sky outside was just as gloomy as his mood. Choosing an outfit for a funeral is usually straightforward, but Arthur faced a strange internal conflict. He stared at his crisp black suit, the one he reserved for truly somber occasions. Using it today felt insincere, almost like he was putting on a theatrical performance of deep personal grief. On the other hand, his navy suit felt far too bright and cheerful, bordering on disrespectful. He was stuck in a state of complete ambivalence, torn between showing respect and feeling like a total fraud. Finally, his eyes landed on a muted charcoal gray suit. It was discreet, unremarkable, and perfectly mirrored his neutral feelings toward Richard. He pulled the jacket from the hanger and shrugged it on, checking his reflection in the mirror. The gray fabric was decent and proper. It was exactly what was needed for fitting the bill without trying too hard. As he tightened a plain, dark tie, he realized the clothes were the easy part. A suit can easily hide your true thoughts from the outside world. But as the clock ticked closer to the departure time, the nervous flutter in his stomach returned. The outfit was set, but his mind was still completely unprepared for the social performance ahead. He grabbed his car keys, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the chilly, gray morning.
Arthur unlocked his car doors just as his 2 co-workers, Marilyn and Devon, hurried across the wet pavement. They scrambled into the seats, bringing the scent of rain and nervous energy into the quiet vehicle. The ride to the chapel instantly became a tense exercise in corporate grieving. Arthur steered through the morning traffic while an awkward silence hung heavy in the air. It was Devon who finally broke the ice, clearing his throat with a guilty look. "Look, obviously it's a tragedy," Devon muttered, "but are we allowed to admit how much less stress the office feels this week?" Marilyn gasped, though she was quick to nod her head in agreement. "I know we're not supposed to speak ill of the dead," she whispered, "but my blood pressure has actually dropped." Arthur glanced at them in the rearview mirror, feeling a strange sense of relief that he wasn't alone in his cynicism. They all wanted to vent about how difficult Richard had been, yet the looming guilt of the funeral kept pulling them back. "Completely off the record," Arthur said, keeping his eyes firmly on the road, "it's hard to switch from complaining about someone to mourning them." "Exactly," Devon replied, leaning forward between the front seats. "Between you and me, I'm terrified of saying the wrong thing to his family." They spent the rest of the commute trading stories, checking themselves every time a complaint went a little too far. It was a bizarre juggling act of honesty and respect. By the time Arthur pulled into the crowded parking lot of the funeral home, the gallows humor vanished. The harsh reality of the day settled over the car once more, stifling their low whispers. They stepped out into the drizzle, the brief comfort of their shared confessions replaced by sheer anxiety.
Arthur stepped through the heavy oak doors and immediately crossed the threshold of the chapel. The atmosphere inside hit him like a physical wall. The intense, sweet scent of hundreds of white lilies filled the entryway, making the air feel thick and heavy. Everywhere he looked, people were moving in slow motion, speaking only in hushed, reverent whispers. A profound sense of dread settled deep into Arthur's chest. He glanced toward the front of the room and saw Richard's widow, Clara, dressed in deep black, gracefully accepting the tears and hugs of the guests. Seeing her genuine, devastated grief made the entire situation feel vividly real. Arthur felt a sudden, sharp wave of anxiety, causing him to break into a subtle, cold sweat. He looked at the slowly moving line of mourners and checked his watch. He had approximately 45 minutes before he would be standing directly in front of that grieving woman. 45 minutes to somehow invent a compliment for a man who had made his professional life miserable. The sheer weight of the social expectation loomed over him, making the grand, quiet room feel suddenly suffocating. Marilyn and Devon quietly drifted toward the guest book, leaving Arthur alone with his spiraling thoughts. He couldn't run away now. The clock was officially ticking. He clutched his hands behind his back, took a slow, shallow breath, and prepared for the longest wait of his life.
Arthur took his seat in the middle row of the smooth wooden pews. The chapel went completely silent as the priest stepped up to the podium to deliver the eulogy. It only took a few minutes for Arthur to realize the priest had clearly never met Richard in real life. The speaker painted a glowing portrait of a saintly, patient, and deeply compassionate man. He spoke of Richard's so-called gentle guidance and his supposed dedication to helping others succeed. Arthur sat perfectly still, but his right eye gave a tiny involuntary twitch. The sheer hypocrisy of the speech felt almost impossible to listen to without reacting. Richard was being completely sugar-coated, transformed by words into someone he never was. Arthur glanced discreetly to his left and saw Devon staring intently at the floor, holding back a smirk. Every single accomplishment the priest mentioned felt wildly embellished and distorted. Arthur knew he had to take every glorified sentence with a massive grain of salt.
The extravagant praise only managed to drive Arthur further and further into his own anxious head. If the priest could stand up there and invent a fictional hero, why was it so hard for him to find just one good phrase? But Arthur didn't want to be a complete hypocrite. He wanted his own words to hold at least a shred of truth. As the eulogy finally drew to a close, the congregation stood up for a final solemn hymn. The singing echoed off the high ceiling, but Arthur couldn't focus on the music. The service was ending, and the moment of truth was rapidly approaching. During the extended moment of silence that followed the hymn, Arthur stared blankly at the altar. He mentally scrolled through the last 5 years of his career, desperately searching the archives of his memory. He needed to dig up just one positive incident, one shining moment where Richard had been objectively decent. First, he looked back on a Friday afternoon 3 years ago when Richard surprised the entire team with donuts. But the memory immediately spoiled when Arthur remembered the pastries were stale, leftovers from a client meeting Richard had hidden in his office. Next, Arthur racked his brains trying to recall a time his old manager had shown genuine professional support. He remembered the sudden approval of his 2-week summer vacation, which had felt like a miracle at the time. But a few months later, an HR clerk casually mentioned that Richard had simply signed the wrong digital form by accident. Every single path Arthur's mind traveled down led directly to a dead end of frustration or selfishness. It was exhausting to sift through half a decade of micromanagement just to find a single usable crumb of kindness. The lights in the chapel brightened slightly, signaling that the congregation was about to be dismissed row by row. The service concluded and the crowded pews began to empty slowly into the main aisle. Arthur joined the shuffling mass of people, watching the receiving line creep closer with each passing minute. He was now only about 10 people away from where Clara stood wiping her eyes. Just ahead of him in the line, his coworker Sarah stepped up to the grieving family. Arthur watched intently as Sarah delivered a beautifully rehearsed, emotionally intense compliment about Richard's leadership. It was a completely fake statement, and Arthur knew for a fact that Sarah had loathed Richard just as much as anyone else. While the performance was flawless, Arthur felt a sudden sharp stubbornness rise up inside himself. He decided right then that he simply cannot bring himself to outright lie to a widow's face. He needed to find a way to express something authentic without causing any unnecessary pain or disrespect. The challenge was like walking a very high and narrow tightrope between brutal honesty and complete fabrication. He needed to be properly diplomatic, ensuring his words sounded supportive while remaining technically true in his own mind. Being tactful didn't mean he had to invent a fake friendship. It meant finding the right angle of the truth. The line moved again, and the 2 people directly in front of him stepped forward to offer their hands. Arthur's heart pounded against his ribs as he vetted and discarded 3 more potential phrases. He was running out of time to find that perfect, elusive balance. The distance between him and the family vanished until there was only one person left standing before him. There were only 3 people left in front of him now. Arthur felt a sudden wave of panic and knew he had to abandon his search for a sweet memory. Instead, he decided to rely on a clever linguistic trick. He shifted his focus away from Richard's actual goodness and centered it entirely on the man's unmistakable impact. By doing this, he could craft a sentence that was 100% true to his own experience, yet comforting to a grieving ear.
It was all about the delicate art of structuring euphemisms and utilizing strategic double meanings. For instance, saying someone was a man you could never forget sounded like a beautiful compliment to a proud wife. But to Arthur and the rest of the overworked staff, the word unforgettable held a vastly different, much darker meaning. He silently rehearsed the exact combination of words in his head, testing the inflection of his voice. He wanted to ensure there was no hint of sarcasm or hesitation when the moment finally arrived. It was a brilliant, highly calculated formula designed to survive the ultimate professional and social crisis. The man in the expensive black suit directly ahead of him shook hands with the family and finally stepped aside. The space opened up, and the brightly lit path was completely clear. Arthur took one last, deep, stabilizing breath and consciously relaxed his tense shoulders. He stepped forward with confidence, his rehearsed formula locked and loaded in his mind.
Arthur stepped up to the front of the line and came face to face with Clara. He looked directly into her eyes and saw the raw, unmistakable devastation of a genuine heartbreak. In that split second, any lingering resentment Arthur held against his old boss instantly melted into pure human empathy. This woman wasn't a difficult corporate manager. She was simply a grieving wife who had just lost her partner. Arthur extended his hand warmly and delivered his carefully crafted line with absolute sincerity. "Clara, I wanted to offer my deepest condolences," he said, his voice steady and calm. Richard was undeniably a force of nature in the office, and his presence was felt by everyone every single day. It was the absolute truth. Richard's intense energy had dominated every room and shaped the entire department. To Arthur, that force had been incredibly stressful, but to Clara, it was the definition of a strong, vibrant man. The words struck the perfect chord, serving as a deeply comforting, authentic validation of her husband's life. Clara's eyes brimmed with fresh tears, and she squeezed Arthur's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you so much, Arthur," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "He always spoke about the sheer intensity of the work, and it means the world to know how much he impacted you." Arthur nodded respectfully, offering a small, supportive smile, before gently stepping away. He had successfully walked the tightrope, delivering a phrase that was completely honest, yet deeply comforting to a breaking heart.
Arthur stepped away from the receiving line and finally escaped into the bright, noisy reception hall. The solemn weight of the chapel lifted, and an immense sigh of relief washed over his entire body. He walked over to the buffet table, picked up a lukewarm egg salad sandwich, and took a slow, thoughtful bite. As he watched the crowd mingle and share quieter conversations, he reflected on the entire emotional journey of the day. He certainly hadn't liked Richard, and a few hours of polite ceremony wasn't going to magically change the past. But as he chewed, the experience provided him with some profound, unexpected food for thought. He realized that true social etiquette isn't about being inherently fake or inventing elaborate, glowing lies. Instead, it is about having the maturity to set aside personal grievances, to hold sacred space for someone else's pain. By finding a way to be both diplomatic and honest, he had managed to honor Clara's grief without betraying his own integrity. Marilyn and Devon joined him by the table, their previously anxious expressions now completely relaxed. "You did great out there," Devon whispered, nodding toward the crowd. "It looked like you really comforted her." "Thanks," Arthur replied, feeling the last lingering bits of tension officially clear the air. He finished his sandwich, feeling a quiet, settled satisfaction with how he had handled the difficult day.
It was time to leave the funeral behind and head back to the office, ready for a brand new chapter of work.
Arthur managed to walk that incredibly difficult tightrope. He didn't tell a massive lie, but he still showed deep respect to someone who was hurting. In real life and in English, learning how to be diplomatic is a superpower. It allows you to protect your own honesty while still being kind to others. Now, I have a question for you to practice your English in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to find a polite way to say something difficult? What phrase did you use? Write your answer using at least one vocabulary word from today's story. If you enjoyed the funeral etiquette and want to keep improving your listening skills with real-life stories, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next story. Goodbye.